In the waning years of World War II, the United States found itself hosting a large number of German prisoners of war. By 1945, the U.S. Department of War had established over 500 POW camps across the country, housing nearly 425,000 Axis prisoners. One such camp, Camp Concordia, located in Kansas, was operational from 1943 to 1946. It had the capacity to hold up to 4,000 prisoners and was primarily composed of German soldiers captured in North Africa and Europe. Camp Concordia was laid out in a military-style grid with barbed wire fences and watchtowers. The camp was divided into compounds, each containing several barracks where the prisoners lived. These wooden structures were basic but sufficient, offering shelter and basic amenities. The camp was guarded by units of the U.S. Army Military Police and was overseen by the Provost Marshal General's office. The guards maintained a strict but fair discipline, ensuring adherence to the Geneva Conventions. Prisoners at Camp Concordia were utilized in various labor capacities, which was in accordance with War Department Circular No. 117, allowing POWs to work on non-military projects. A significant portion of the prisoners were assigned to agricultural labor, aiding local farmers in the planting and harvesting of crops. Others were employed in canneries, lumber mills, and on railroad construction projects. Some were even assigned to local grocery stores and factories, performing menial tasks under strict supervision. The logistics of prisoner labor were meticulously documented in transportation logs and agricultural labor contracts. These records reveal that prisoners were transported to and from work sites in military trucks. Their work was compensated with a nominal wage, deposited in camp canteen coupons, which could be used to purchase additional food or personal items. This system was designed to maintain morale and discipline among the prisoners, while also contributing to the local economy, which had been strained by the war. Food systems within the camp were organized to comply with rationing policies, which were in effect across the United States. Prisoners received meals that adhered to nutritional guidelines set forth by the Red Cross inspections. These inspections were frequent and ensured that conditions within the camp met international standards. The camp kitchen staff, often comprised of prisoners themselves, prepared meals that were simple but adequate. Civilian attitudes towards the German prisoners varied. Some locals viewed them with suspicion or resentment, while others saw them as a necessary labor force during a time of national shortage. Recorded incidents in camp newspapers and local archives indicate that interactions between prisoners and locals were generally peaceful, though not without tension. There were occasional reports of minor altercations or misunderstandings, but these were swiftly addressed by camp authorities. The camp administration placed a strong emphasis on discipline, medical access, and educational opportunities. Camp Concordia had a small medical facility staffed by U.S. Army medical personnel, providing basic health care to the prisoners. The camp also offered educational classes, organized by the YMCA, which included English language instruction and vocational training. These programs were part of a broader effort by the U.S. government to re-educate German prisoners, preparing them for eventual repatriation. Mail was an important link to the outside world for the prisoners, and they were allowed to send and receive letters, subject to censorship. This communication was vital for maintaining morale and keeping connections with families in Germany. In the spring of 1945, a unique incident occurred that would highlight the stark contrast between the war-torn landscapes of Europe and the relative abundance of the American home front. A group of prisoners was assigned to clean a parking lot outside a local high school. As they worked, they observed rows of privately owned vehicles, many of which were brand-new sedans. To the German prisoners, these cars were a striking symbol of American prosperity. In Germany, the war had devastated infrastructure and resources, and private ownership of automobiles was rare. The sight of teenagers arriving in new cars, purchased by their parents, was bewildering. The German sergeant in charge of the work detail initially assumed that this was an exhibition for the wealthy elite. However, a conversation with the school custodian, recorded in camp logs, revealed that most American families could afford basic automobiles. The custodian explained that the students were more likely to complain about gasoline prices, which had risen due to wartime shortages, than about the ownership of cars. This revelation was profound for the prisoners, who had been indoctrinated with the notion of Germany's national pride in its military machinery, particularly its tanks and armored vehicles. The casual abundance of civilian machines in America, driven by teenagers, suggested a different kind of power and prosperity. The ideological dismantling of the prisoners' worldview was not immediate, nor was it marked by dramatic epiphanies. Rather, it was a gradual process influenced by the environments and systems they encountered within the camp and the communities they served. The observations made at the high school parking lot were just one of many experiences that contributed to this shift in perspective. As the war drew to a close and Germany faced defeat, the U.S. Army initiated post-war repatriation and re-education programs. These efforts aimed to prepare the prisoners for their return to a changed Germany. The focus was on democratic principles, economic reconstruction, and the rejection of militaristic ideologies. Through these structured programs and everyday encounters, the German prisoners at Camp Concordia and other camps across the United States were exposed to a way of life that challenged their preconceived notions. The day they saw American teenagers drive new cars became a small but significant part of their broader journey towards understanding the complexities of American society and the realities of a post-war world. As the German prisoners of war continued their duties at Camp Concordia, the incident at the high school parking lot remained a topic of subdued discussion among them. The sight of American teenagers driving new automobiles had presented a stark contrast to the scarcity and devastation left in the wake of the war in Germany. For these prisoners, many of whom had been plucked from the battlefield and thrust into the quiet confinement of a foreign camp, this encounter challenged the deeply held perceptions they had of power and prosperity, forcing them to reconcile their understanding of these concepts with the reality they observed in the United States. The sergeant, a man who had once walked the streets of Berlin with a sense of pride in his nation's military might, found his assumptions questioned by the school custodian's explanations. The custodian, a kindly man with a rough-hewn demeanor, had casually mentioned that the presence of these vehicles was not an extraordinary spectacle, but a common aspect of American life, accessible to many families across the country. This revelation had a profound impact on the sergeant and his fellow prisoners, highlighting the economic disparities between their homeland, ravaged by war, and the nation that held them captive. In the days following the incident, the sergeant noticed subtle shifts in the camp's atmosphere. Conversations among the prisoners took on a more reflective tone as they pondered the implications of what they had seen. The sergeant, who held a position of informal leadership among the prisoners owing to his rank and demeanor, found himself at the center of these discussions. The men were curious, seeking to understand how a country engaged in a global conflict could maintain such a level of civilian prosperity. The prisoners' curiosity extended beyond the confines of the parking lot. During their work assignments, which often involved maintenance and labor tasks around the camp and occasionally in nearby communities, they began to observe other aspects of American life with heightened awareness. The abundance of goods in local stores was staggering. Shelves were lined with products ranging from canned goods to fresh produce, a sight that was becoming increasingly rare in Germany. The efficiency of public services, such as the regular collection of mail and the prompt arrival of buses, was another aspect that fascinated them. The relative ease with which the American population seemed to navigate their daily lives all contributed to a growing sense of bewilderment and introspection among the prisoners. Despite the war's ongoing toll on Europe, the American home front appeared to flourish in many respects. This prosperity was not limited to material wealth. The prisoners noted the apparent freedom and individualism that characterized American society. Teenagers driving new cars, a phenomenon almost unimaginable back home, symbolized a cultural norm that was foreign to the prisoners. In Germany, where militarization and scarcity were prevalent, such displays of personal freedom and prosperity were almost non-existent. As part of an educational initiative, the camp administration began to offer programs aimed at re-educating the prisoners. These programs were designed to introduce democratic principles and provide a broader understanding of American values and governance. The effort was part of a larger strategy to prepare the prisoners for eventual repatriation and reintegration into post-war German society. The sergeant, along with other prisoners, attended these sessions with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. The lectures covered topics ranging from the structure of the American government to the importance of civil liberties and individual rights, often delivered by professors and experts brought in to challenge the prisoners' preconceived notions. Through these programs, the prisoners were exposed to ideas that contrasted sharply with the totalitarian ideologies they had been indoctrinated with back home. The concept of individual rights, in particular, was a topic of great interest and debate among the prisoners, as it stood in stark contrast to the collective identity that had been emphasized under the Nazi regime. While some prisoners were resistant to these concepts, others found them intriguing, especially when juxtaposed with the tangible examples of American prosperity they witnessed. The re-education efforts were not without their challenges. The prisoners, having been soldiers in a war driven by nationalist fervor, were often resistant to concepts that clashed with their previous beliefs. However, the practical demonstrations of American prosperity, such as the high school parking lot incident, provided tangible examples that complemented the theoretical lessons they received. The sergeant, in particular, began to see the value in understanding these new concepts, recognizing that they might hold the key to rebuilding a better future for his war-torn homeland. As the war drew closer to its conclusion, the prisoners began to consider the implications of returning to a Germany that was being reshaped by defeat and occupation. The sergeant, in particular, contemplated the role he might play in this new landscape. The ideological dismantling that was occurring within him and his comrades was not an overt transformation, but a subtle, ongoing process fueled by their experiences in the United States. The sergeant found himself questioning the principles he had once held dear, wondering how they could be reconciled with the new ideas he was being exposed to. The everyday interactions with American civilians, albeit limited, contributed to this process. The sergeant observed that the Americans he encountered, from the school custodian to the camp guards, were largely indifferent to the prisoners' past affiliations. Instead, they engaged with the prisoners on a human level, providing a glimpse into a society that valued individual character over collective identity. These interactions, though brief, left a lasting impression on the prisoners, offering them a new perspective on what it meant to be part of a community. The realization that American teenagers could take for granted what was considered a luxury in Europe underscored the broader economic and cultural differences between the two nations. For the prisoners, this understanding was accompanied by a sense of irony. Germany's pride in its military machinery was matched by America's casual abundance of civilian technology. It was a juxtaposition that spoke volumes about the divergent paths the two nations had taken. As the war ended and plans for the prisoners' repatriation were put into motion, the sergeant reflected on the experiences that had shaped his time at Camp Concordia. The high school parking lot incident, though seemingly mundane, had served as a catalyst for a deeper exploration of the cultural and ideological chasm between the two nations. It had opened his eyes to the complexities of the world beyond the narrow confines of his previous understanding. The sergeant realized that the process of returning to Germany would involve more than a physical journey. It required an adaptation to a new reality in which the values and priorities he had once held dear would be subject to reevaluation. He understood that rebuilding his nation would require a new approach, one that embraced the lessons he had learned during his time in captivity. As the prisoners prepared to leave the camp, they carried with them not only memories of their captivity, but also the seeds of a broader understanding of a world beyond their previous comprehension. In the years that followed, many former prisoners would reflect on their time in the United States as a pivotal moment in their lives. The ideological dismantling that had begun with a simple encounter in a high school parking lot would continue to influence their perspectives and actions in post-war Germany. The sergeant, like his fellow prisoners, would navigate the complexities of rebuilding a nation, informed by the lessons learned during his time in captivity and the unexpected insights gained from the everyday sights and sounds of American life. As they returned to their homeland, these former prisoners would find themselves at the forefront of a new era, tasked with the monumental challenge of rebuilding a society from the ashes of war. Their experiences in the United States, characterized by both the harsh realities of captivity and the enlightening encounters with a different way of life, would serve as a guiding light in their efforts to forge a new path for Germany, one that embraced the ideals of democracy, freedom, and prosperity they had come to understand during their time in Camp Concordia. As the spring of 1945 unfolded in Camp Concordia, Kansas, life for the German prisoners of war settled into a routine that, despite its predictability, was punctuated by moments of unexpected insight. These men, once soldiers of the formidable German army, found themselves immersed in a world that was vastly different from the one they had left behind. Each day was marked by labor assignments across the surrounding areas, tasks that were often mundane but carried the potential for profound revelations. Among these assignments was the seemingly insignificant task of cleaning the local high school parking lot. At first glance, this chore appeared to be just another menial job in a long list of duties designed to keep the prisoners occupied. However, the task revealed itself to be a window into American society, sparking discussions that would resonate deeply among the prisoners, particularly under the guidance of the German sergeant who had become an informal leader among them. The parking lot was filled with gleaming automobiles, a sight that was both fascinating and unsettling to the prisoners. These vehicles, driven by teenagers, represented a level of prosperity and technological advancement that was unimaginable amidst the ruins of war-torn Germany. The contrast was stark. The German military machinery they once revered, tanks, aircraft, and submarines, was now overshadowed by the everyday accessibility and abundance of American civilian technology. These cars were not mere transportation, they were symbols of a thriving, prosperous society. The presence of these vehicles became a catalyst for significant discussions among the prisoners. For many who had been engineers, mechanics, or factory workers before the war, the cars were a reminder of the technological innovations they had once been proud of in Germany. Now they found themselves questioning the very foundations of that pride. The sergeant, who had once been a staunch believer in German engineering superiority, was confronted with a new kind of power, one not found in the might of military hardware, but in the everyday lives of civilians and their technological conveniences. These realizations were further amplified by the presence of Mr. Thompson, the school custodian. An amiable and talkative man, Mr. Thompson took it upon himself to engage with the prisoners, demystifying the American way of life with his straightforward, honest demeanor. His explanations, free of condescension, painted a picture of a nation that had managed to sustain both military efforts and domestic prosperity. He spoke of how the production of consumer goods, such as automobiles, had continued alongside military manufacturing, leading to an economy that could support both warfare and a thriving civilian life. The prisoners were struck by the casual complaints of American teenagers about gasoline prices, a minor inconvenience in their otherwise abundant lives. This underscored the broader availability of resources and the economic opportunities that were largely absent in Germany, where scarcity and rationing had become the norm. Mr. Thompson's insights provided the prisoners with a clearer understanding of the economic structures that supported such abundance, prompting them to consider the societal values that enabled this prosperity. The sergeant played a crucial role in facilitating these conversations, encouraging his fellow prisoners to look beyond the superficial aspects of material wealth. He urged them to delve into the underlying economic principles and societal values that allowed for such abundance. These discussions often took place in the evenings within the confines of their barracks. There, they huddled in small groups, reflecting on their observations and sharing insights gleaned from their interactions with Americans. The educational programs offered at Camp Concordia further reinforced these insights. Classes on American history, democratic principles, and the functioning of a capitalist economy were initially met with skepticism, but gradually influenced the prisoners' perspectives. The sergeant, with his analytical mind and leadership skills, found particular interest in discussions about individual rights and the role of government in protecting those rights. This was a stark contrast to the authoritarian regime they had served and offered a glimpse of a different way of structuring society. As the war drew to a close, the prisoners were acutely aware of the impending changes awaiting them upon their return to Germany. The sergeant, in particular, contemplated the responsibilities that would accompany the task of rebuilding a nation. He understood that the insights gained in the United States could serve as valuable tools in shaping a future that prioritized both technological advancement and civilian well-being. The end of hostilities in Europe brought about a shift in the atmosphere at Camp Concordia. News of Germany's surrender reached the camp, eliciting a mixture of relief and trepidation among the prisoners. The prospect of returning home was both a source of hope and a reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. The sergeant, alongside his fellow prisoners, prepared for repatriation with a sense of purpose, tempered by the realities of a devastated homeland. As the prisoners boarded trains that would eventually lead them back to Germany, they carried with them more than just personal belongings. The experiences at Camp Concordia, the unexpected encounters with American prosperity, and the educational programs had equipped them with new perspectives. These insights, though not immediately transformative, held the potential to influence their roles in post-war Germany. The sergeant, reflecting on his time in the United States, recognized the irony that lay at the heart of their experiences. The military might that had once been the pride of Germany stood diminished in the face of a different kind of strength, one born of economic resilience and cultural openness. The American teenagers, with their new cars and seemingly trivial concerns, represented a future that was both foreign and aspirational. As the trains carried the prisoners away from Camp Concordia, the sergeant and his compatriots pondered the implications of their newfound understanding. The journey back to a changed Germany would be fraught with challenges, but the lessons learned in the Kansas heartland would serve as a guide. The sergeant knew that the path to rebuilding would require more than just physical reconstruction. It would demand a reevaluation of values and priorities, informed by the unexpected revelations of their time as prisoners in America. The story of the German prisoners at Camp Concordia, their encounters with American prosperity, and their subsequent return to Germany is a testament to the complexities of cultural exchange during times of conflict. It highlights the power of observation, education, and reflection in shaping perspectives and influencing change. As the prisoners stepped into the future, they did so with a deeper understanding of the world and their place within it, a legacy of their experiences in a land that had been both an adversary and a teacher. As the German prisoners continued their work in the high school parking lot, the daily routine of observing the American students became a point of both fascination and bewilderment. Each morning, they watched the students arrive in their shiny automobiles, a sight that never failed to captivate them. The prisoners, many of whom had served in the Wehrmacht, were accustomed to viewing vehicles as tools of war, machines of destruction and conquest. The sight of these automobiles, brightly polished and driven by teenagers, was a stark reminder of the cultural and economic chasm separating their experiences from those of their young American counterparts. For the German prisoners, the cars symbolized a stark juxtaposition to their lived experiences. During the war, they had seen vehicles used to transport troops, weapons, and supplies across battlefields. These machines were often battered and battle-worn, carrying the weight of conflict and survival. In contrast, the cars in the high school parking lot were pristine, symbols of freedom and leisure, rather than instruments of war. The prisoners found it difficult to reconcile these images with their own memories. Mr. Thompson, the school custodian, remained a key figure in facilitating the prisoners' understanding of this new world. A man of few words but great insight, Mr. Thompson took it upon himself to bridge the gap between the two cultures. His explanations were straightforward, often tinged with a matter-of-factness that underscored the normality of what the prisoners found extraordinary. He explained that the vehicles the students drove were products of a booming American economy, nurtured by industrial advancements and a societal structure that encouraged consumption and growth. The teenagers' complaints about gasoline prices were not born of scarcity, but of the natural fluctuations in a capitalist market, a concept that was foreign to the Germans who had lived through rationing and shortages. Mr. Thompson would share stories of the automobile industry, recounting how the assembly lines of Detroit had revolutionized manufacturing and brought cars within reach of ordinary citizens. He spoke of the economic boom following the Great Depression, a time when America had reinvented itself through innovation and hard work. The prisoners listened intently, trying to grasp the mechanics of a system so different from their own wartime economy, which had been ravaged by scarcity and bombings. The German sergeant, representing the prisoners' collective curiosity and evolving perspective, took particular interest in these discussions. With each passing day, his intrigue grew. He observed the students with a keen eye, noting their casual demeanor and the ease with which they navigated their lives. This was a generation untouched by the direct horrors of the battlefield, their concerns more aligned with social engagements and academic pursuits than survival and warfare. The sergeant's observations, shared with his fellow prisoners during their return to Camp Concordia, sparked further discourse on the disparities between their worlds. The conversations among the prisoners often extended into the night. They gathered in small groups, discussing what they had seen and heard. The sergeant, who had always been a thoughtful leader, encouraged these dialogues, believing they were crucial for understanding the broader implications of their experiences. The contrast between American abundance and their own struggles was a recurring theme. They marveled at the idea that a nation could thrive so soon after the devastation of war, and they pondered the factors that contributed to such resilience. The camp's educational programs played a critical role in this ongoing transformation. Classes in English, American history, and democratic principles were designed to introduce the prisoners to the tenets of freedom and individual rights. These lessons, while initially met with skepticism, gradually found resonance among the prisoners. They began to understand that the prosperity they witnessed was not merely a result of material wealth, but was deeply intertwined with the political and social frameworks that supported it. The educators at Camp Concordia were patient and persistent. They understood that changing deeply ingrained beliefs would take time. The classes were interactive, encouraging discussions and debates. The prisoners learned about the American Revolution, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. They studied the principles of democracy, grappling with ideas of individual liberty and the rule of law. Over time, these lessons began to shift their perspectives, challenging their preconceived notions. As the weeks progressed, the German prisoners found themselves increasingly integrated into the fabric of the local community. Their labor, initially viewed with suspicion, became an accepted part of the town's functioning. The prisoners worked alongside American civilians, participating in agricultural tasks and local projects. These interactions, though limited, provided further opportunities for cultural exchange and understanding. In the fields, they learned about American farming techniques, which were vastly different from the methods they knew. They worked alongside farmers who shared stories of their families and their hopes for the future. These interactions broke down barriers, humanizing both sides. The prisoners were no longer just remnants of an enemy army. They were individuals with their own stories and dreams. The Americans, in turn, began to see them as people rather than adversaries. The war's end brought with it a shift in the prisoners' circumstances. News of Germany's surrender reached Camp Concordia with a mix of relief and uncertainty. For the prisoners, the cessation of hostilities signaled the beginning of their repatriation process, yet it also marked a period of introspection and reevaluation. The lessons learned and the observations made in America would accompany them as they prepared to return to a homeland irrevocably altered by conflict and defeat. The news of the surrender was met with mixed emotions. There was relief that the war was finally over, but also apprehension about what awaited them back home. Many prisoners worried about their families and the state of their cities. They knew that Germany had been devastated by bombing raids, and they feared what they would find upon their return. However, they also carried hope, fueled by the lessons of resilience and prosperity they had learned in America. The American teenagers, meanwhile, continued their academic pursuits largely unaffected by the global upheaval. Their lives, characterized by a sense of normalcy and continuity, stood in stark contrast to the upheaval experienced by the prisoners. For the German sergeant, this realization underscored a profound truth. The true measure of a nation's strength lay not in its military might, but in the resilience and prosperity of its people. As he watched the students prepare for graduation, the sergeant contemplated the future. These young Americans, with their whole lives ahead of them, embodied the potential for growth and change. They were inheritors of a system that valued education, innovation, and individual rights. The sergeant realized that these were the qualities that had allowed America to emerge from the war stronger than before. As the prisoners departed Camp Concordia, their experiences in America left an indelible mark on their perceptions of power and prosperity. The sergeant and his men carried with them the knowledge that the vehicles in the high school parking lot were more than mere symbols of wealth. They represented a way of life built on democratic principles and economic opportunity. This understanding, born of observation and education, would inform their reintegration into post-war Germany, shaping their roles in rebuilding a nation from the ashes of conflict. The journey back to Germany was filled with uncertainty, but also a sense of purpose. The prisoners knew they had a role to play in rebuilding their country. They were determined to apply the lessons they had learned, to contribute to a society that valued peace and prosperity. The sergeant, in particular, felt a deep responsibility to share what he had experienced, to inspire others to look beyond the past and towards a future of hope and possibility. The story of the German prisoners at Camp Concordia serves as a testament to the complexities of cultural exchange and the transformative power of exposure to new ideas and systems. It highlights the importance of understanding and adaptation in the face of change, a lesson as relevant today as it was in the aftermath of World War II. In the years that followed, many of the former prisoners remained in contact with their American counterparts. Letters were exchanged, friendships maintained, and stories shared. These connections served as a reminder of the enduring impact of their time at Camp Concordia. The experiences they had, the lessons they learned, and the friendships they forged became a part of their identities, shaping their perspectives and guiding their actions. As the German prisoners of war departed Camp Concordia in the summer of 1946, their return journey to Germany marked the end of a unique chapter in their lives. The experiences they had in America, particularly the encounter with the high school parking lot filled with new cars, had left a lasting impression on their understanding of prosperity and societal values. Upon their repatriation, the former prisoners were greeted by a Germany in the midst of rebuilding and transformation. The war-ravaged landscape they returned to was a stark contrast to the organized and prosperous environment they had observed in the United States. Despite the challenges, the insights gained during their time in captivity provided them with a framework for navigating this new reality. Many of the former prisoners became active participants in the reconstruction efforts. The sergeant, in particular, found himself involved in initiatives aimed at fostering economic recovery and promoting democratic values. Drawing on the lessons learned at Camp Concordia, he advocated for policies that emphasized technological advancement and individual rights, recognizing the importance of these elements in rebuilding a strong, resilient society. The ideological shift that had begun during their captivity continued to influence their perspectives and actions. The sergeant and his fellow former prisoners saw themselves not only as contributors to the physical rebuilding of Germany, but also as agents of cultural and ideological change. Their experiences in America inspired them to challenge old paradigms and embrace new ways of thinking, contributing to the broader democratization and modernization of post-war Germany. Over time, the story of the German prisoners at Camp Concordia became part of the larger narrative of reconciliation and rebuilding that characterized the post-war era. Their journey from soldiers to prisoners to proponents of change exemplified the transformative power of exposure to different cultures and ideas. The lessons they carried with them served as a foundation for their roles in shaping a new Germany, one that prioritized peace, prosperity, and the values of democracy. As the years passed, the former prisoners reflected on their time in America with a sense of gratitude and understanding. The unexpected encounter at the high school parking lot, once a symbol of cultural and economic disparity, had become a catalyst for personal and collective growth. It had opened their eyes to the possibilities of a world defined by cooperation and innovation, leaving an indelible mark on their lives and on the future of their nation.